So I did something I shouldn't have, and I stopped the recording instead of pausing it. So I apologize. But we'll pick up right where we left off. So essentially, the World Health Organization created an age-friendly city framework that has become sort of a standard for people to designate their cities to be age-friendly. So what it consists of is both infrastructure and socialization. And the infrastructure part is the built environment, which is housing, transportation, outdoor spaces, and buildings. The social environment is more about the social participation, respect and inclusion, and civic participation and employment. So, just to give you an example of something that abides by this model or standard, is the village model. And so we do have one local here, and I think it's in Beacon Hill, if I'm not mistaken. But here is the STL Village link, which is the local one. And these are beautiful pictures because they emphasize that socialization piece that is so important and the infrastructure of having it to support this type of socialization. So, the basic idea of the village model is that older adults want autonomy and community, the chance for meaningful activities, a feeling of being valued in your community, and social connection. So, essentially, this idea of we cannot build enough senior communities and retirement facilities to house all older adults, nor should we try. This idea of cities should be age friendly. It shouldn't just be spaces where, oh, this is a non, this is an age-friendly community only. This is something that should be the standard. We should be able to make our cities age-friendly without having a separate section of just age-friendly networks. So the village model is one of the biggest ones that mirrors this, and I think you're about to see, their what they abide by, but I think that this is something that continues to be a good example for this. So their guiding principles is that they're self-governing and self-supporting. They consolidate and coordinate services. They have strategic partnerships outside of their community that really help them, partner with stores or transportation services that really allow them to stay connected to outside community. There's holistic, person-centered, and consumer-driven care there. There's promoting volunteerism and civic engagement and intergenerational connections, which I know a lot of you mentioned as part of your retirement plan and your assignments. So this last point is really important because we know that volunteerism is really important to health and well-being. And the intergenerational piece is what we've been mentioning about this is how we can also destigmatize what we think about for older adults in our nation. So I hope that this encourages you that there are models that are trying to emulate this, and I hope that this is something of the future where this is not just one small designated space, but rather what the society that we live in already should be age friendly. So what are some member benefits if you are a member is that you get services provided by volunteers, you have discounted services provided by providers and community partners within and outside of the community. And then you have social activities and exercise classes that you can participate in within the village. Currently, there's 253 villages and 58 more in development, mostly East and West Coast, as you can see. And basically, there's this model that's the village to village network, and you can check out the link here. But essentially, they're interconnected, so that's really cool. You get to connect with different ones, like I just keep thinking about clients that you have had that maybe have wanted to move to areas. These might be places worthwhile to check into to see, there is an interconnection of villages of each local place, and outside of states too. So that's really cool to have, that interconnectedness. So these are two articles that are really important for you to read. And the reason I say that is because we really want to know from an evidence-based perspective and evaluation of research in these communities, what is actually helpful. So we found that in the impact of the village model, there was a huge health and well-being benefit, especially for older women. We see that it improved mobility and improved well-being. And that's really, really important for older adults to continue living their best health and happy lives. And that's essentially the goal of this. So I'm really encouraged to see that there's research in this area that we need to continue to evaluate for the programs that we conduct. Keep in mind, this is something you will have power over, even though you're not potentially a principal investigator on a project. It might be something that you partner with a university, partner with a scholar, where you can develop your ideas and evaluate programs. Like I keep thinking, even when I wasn't like a principal investigator, I was still actively collecting data that was approved, whether it was through a grant, whether it's through a university that I partner with. I was able to collect data to evaluate the outcomes of that program. So it's important for you as social workers, as health practitioners, as sociologists to form these relationships that are then going to influence not just the literature world, but also your actual intervention or your actual model that you're putting forth. So another question that people have is what about rural areas? I mean, there's a lot of the policies that we have are based on big cities. So what about rural areas? I will say rural areas are really excluded in policy. Most policies are for cities, especially when it comes to age-friendly communities. So some ideas that have been thrown out there for rural areas, and this is not an exhaustive list, so there's probably many, many more now. But essentially, one of the ones that I've heard is increased fundings for home modifications. So in rural areas, you still need to make things accessible and age friendly in that way. We talked about built environment, infrastructure, housing. That's all important. Home modifications are worth investing in, especially for rural communities, which can prevent falls, which can prevent hospitalizations. And we know that there might be a lack of access to preventive care or just limited in the sense that it might be too far to access. So that's something that can help in many, many ways. There's also incentivizing health and social service providers to operate in rural areas. This goes along with what I just said. If someone has a hospitalization, there needs to be access to care. And then transportation can be more difficult in rural areas. So that means social isolation can dramatically increase in older adults, especially if they can't drive. So there's been some initiatives related to making roads more accessible, for example, in rural communities, so that this is not something that just by being an older adult, you're not able to do, and that way increase your social connection to the community. So there's a beautiful brief that has a age-friendly rural and remote communities guide. And so you can check into it. There's a checklist for you to see of how it meets rural areas. So I linked it here for you to check out on your own. Okay. I think that's it for now, because we've discussed driving already, but I want to go over assignment two really quickly. So assignment two, your products will take many different forms. Essentially, you want to include a summary of the problem. So the who, what, where, how, why, explain significance and urgency of the issue. Well, that's one of the biggest things we get told, especially in research. Like you have to make it so that why would people care? If I'm going to distribute this online, if I'm going to distribute this in my field placement, why would people lean towards picking up that brochure or going to that website? Main content is provide a summary of the facts, placing issues into context, synthesize the existing literature or new research data, especially policy briefs. You want to make sure that you're including, if I was doing the village model, for example, I would include those two articles I shared as part of the reason why this village model is worth investing in. And then implications and recommendations. So support your implications or recommendations by evidence. So maybe say something like policymakers have been proposing this village model. It's a testimonial that older adults have said X, Y, and Z. The World Health Organization has an age-friendly network, and they've provided this as a brief for this. So the feasibility is also important. I've had some people even put like how much money it would cost and how much money it would save the government. Conclusions, clear and concise, and references can be in small font or footnotes. Just also as a quick aside, if you are looking to make your brochures inclusive, which you should, especially age and disability inclusive, the people recommend 18-point font or higher for those who are I forget the word for it, like hard no, hard of hearing is not the right term. when you can't see. I'm sorry, I'm blanking out. I can say it in Spanish, but I can't say it in English. But yeah, so basically if you're blind or if you're unable to see well, things like that, or if you have a disability that really um, messes with your ability to read, that 18-point font can make it really accessible. And then author details, acknowledgments, and applicable disclaimers. So just have a little sheet at the front or cover letter, something that highlights who did what, so that way I can keep that in mind when grading. And that is it. Next week, we're going to be covering productive engagement in later life. I hope that everyone has a great rest of your day. And I'll see you next week.